All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are in for the $300 max here at this 1-3 game at Outlaws. We lost about $100 or so, just seeing some flops and missing before eventually we looked down at ace king suited on the small blind. There's a raise to 20 and 2 limpers, so when the action gets back over to me, I decide to make it 45. Our boy Connor decides to go all in with a little over 200 in our stack. I decide, what the heck, this is good enough to go here. I'm hoping our opponent has a mid-range pocket pair, but unfortunately that is not the case when he flips over pocket kings. 463 in the middle, and we are praying for an ace. Not much to analyze here, so I'll just run the clip.
Ooh, picked up outs. It's 10.
Unfortunately, that ace never came. The flop, however, was pretty good for us because we picked up an additional 4 outs. Any jack would have given us a straight, but as you guys saw, it did not come. Still, overall happy to take this flip, especially this early in the session when all of us are trying to build up a stack. Moving on to the next hand, we look down at pocket 10s on the big blind when the hijack decides to open up for $25. Cutoff calls the 25, button folds, and then the small blind puts in the call for 25 as well. With this much money in the pot already, we have a very strong starting hand, so I definitely want to put in a raise here for some protection since our 10s are a bit vulnerable going 4 ways. So I think we need to raise a good amount here, enough to get potentially 1 caller because we are out of position, so we don't want to play this multi-way out of position. I decide to bump it up to $100. The hijack gets out of the way. Cutoff calls. Surprisingly, the small blind comes along as well. 325 in the middle, and this board runs out as bad as you could possibly imagine. Ace, queen, 9 with 2 spades. Small blind checks it over to us, and now we have a decision to make. Do we wave the white flag and just give up on this hand, or do we keep up the aggression? I think pocket 10s is just about the worst hand that we're going to have in this spot a lot of the time. I'm expecting us to have pocket 10s, jacks, queens, kings, aces, given the pre-flop action, a lot of ace king and ace queen suited. So for those reasons, I do continue here with a bet sizing of 150, which I think is pretty standard on a board this wet, and both opponents luckily muck pretty quickly. Very happy that neither of our opponents had anything strong enough to continue. The $10 button straddle is on by yours truly. That means I put my money out there before we saw our hands. Cutoff calls, the small blind calls, and the big blind folds. I'm not going to do anything crazy here with king 8 offsuit. It's a really bad hand, so we go ahead and check it. $30 in the middle, and the board comes ace 8 deuce with 2 spades. Everybody checks around. I have second pair, but don't want to bet yet. But when the king of diamonds hits the turn and our opponent leads out for $15, well, now we have something to say. There's a flush draw and a diamond draw on this board, so I want to put in a raise, but there's not really a whole lot in this pot yet, and this particular opponent I feel like is a little bit more snug, so I don't think he's going to call a big raise on this turn here. So without knowing what to do, I just decided to min click it. That pretty much guarantees that he's going to put in the call and then evaluate what he does on the river. So we make it $30 to go. He calls 30. It's now $90 in the middle, and we get an absolutely phenomenal card on the river. We get the king of clubs. Our opponent checks it over to us, and now I need to try and extract maximum value out of a player that I consider to be pretty tight. Typically here, I like to fire 120 to 150 with the hand as strong as a full house, but I don't think there's any chance in hell he's going to call on $150 on this river here. I bet $75. Our opponent thought it over for 30 to 45 seconds, but did put in the call. Our opponent never revealed what his hand was, but we did take down this $240 pot. Now this hand wasn't anything too crazy, but it did start a beautiful snowball, which you guys aren't going to have to wait very long to see, because the very next hand, we pick up pocket 4s in the hijack. There's an open to 15 but under the gun. Cutoff and button both come along. Blinds get out of the way. No reason for us to get out of line with our 4s here. We can just try to set mine. But when I see the flop come out deuce deuce 10 and the action checks over to me, I'm thinking we might be able to steal this spot. There's only 2 more 2s in the deck and 3 10s in the deck, and if our opponents don't have either of those cards, it's going to be pretty easy for us to take this one down. So I lead out here for $25 into 60. The cutoff folds, button calls, under the gun gets out of the way. There's now 110 in the middle, and we're going heads up with the villain from the last hand. He's clearly not happy and coming back for revenge with either his deuce or 10 here. I'm really regretting taking a stab at this pot when we were out of position. If we were on the button, this would have been a lot easier to navigate, but luckily Mark is in the box and he's an absolute beast. beast. He throws a 4 of diamonds on the turn here to give us a very disguised full house. As I mentioned before, we can't be blasting off into this particular opponent, so we go for a very small bet sizing here of $40. Doesn't take very long for our opponent to put in the call. 190 in the middle, and we go to this river, which comes a 7 of clubs. The last time we were involved with this opponent, we went really small on the river to keep it on the value heavy side and ensure he puts in a call. This time I'm going to do the exact opposite and go for a full pot size bet, trying to tell him that we either have a really big hand or absolutely nothing. So we do just that, and I fire here for $200. Our opponent doesn't snap fold, which is good news, but he doesn't call either, so not really sure where he's at in the hand. If he had a deuce, he would have called already, so this is most likely just top pair. Our opponent goes back and forth for quite a while here, takes a quick sip of his beer to ease the nerves a little bit, but obviously it did not work because he's right back in the blender, unsure of what decision to make here. Pretty tough spot for our opponent, but eventually he does make the correct choice and he ends up throwing away king 10 here. Kinda sucks that we didn't get the call, but considering how long our opponent took to make the decision, I think our bet sizing was correct and I feel like we played this hand well. But don't get out of your seats just yet, folks, because this rivalry is just blossoming. We look down at ace 5 suited under the gun and I have a $10 straddle out. Our rival is in middle position. He let out for $30. 3 players put in the call, and when the action gets back over to me, even though 8-5 suited isn't a phenomenal hand, especially not out of position, we are getting way too good of a price when we're closing out the action, so I do put in the call. 150 in the middle, and we go to this flop 5 ways, and we get a pretty good flop for our hand. The board runs out king 7-6 rainbow. We flop an open-ended straight draw on a king high board. The action checks over to me, and while I'm perfectly okay with betting my draws, I also think that a king high board is going to smash our rival's range. So I decide to check here and am not disappointed when $25 hits the felt. Unfortunately, at this point, everybody else decides to get out of the hand, so we're going to be continuing here with just the 2 of us. And I am not going to be making it easy. Since everybody else got out of the way, it looks like we're going to have to build this pot ourselves. I also want to take back the aggression here, just in case our draw bricks out, giving ourselves some more options to win this hand. So we put in a check raise to $75 here, and our opponent puts in the call pretty quickly. Wasn't expecting him to fold for this amount, to be honest. $300 in the middle, and the 8 of spades peels off on the turn. We don't make our straight, but we do pick up a lot of equity versus our opponent here, since I'm expecting him to have a lot of king X in this spot. Stuff like ace king, king queen, king jack suited. This 8 actually helps our hand out a ton. Now we can hit any 9, any 5, any 8 to take our opponent down. Unfortunately, that is going to put 4 to a straight on the board, and it's going to be very hard to get paid, but we'll worry about that on the river. For now, we're going to bet $150. Our opponent thinks it over for 30 seconds or so, but does put in the call. There's now $600 in the middle, and the 6 of clubs peels off on the river. I don't ever expect our pair of 8s to be good here, especially not against this particular opponent, so we don't really have much of a choice but to bet here, and we definitely want to keep it on the bigger side. At this point, we have about a pot size bet left behind with a little over 600 in our stack, but I think if we go all in here, it might look a little bit suspect. So at the time, I was thinking I wanted to put in a big enough bet that it looks like I was committing myself to the pot and that I wasn't going to fold if he came over the top and shoved. Whether or not this is correct, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Anyhow, I go for a bet sizing of $400 here on the river, and once again, our opponent enters the tank. There's been no shortage of tough spots that we've put our rival in tonight. We showed him a winner the first time when he called. The second hand, he made a pretty good fold, and we showed him a winner again, both of which were full houses. And once again, the board has paired. I can only imagine what's going through his head at the moment. A full house is a really hard hand to make, but we've shown him 2 already, and he knows that we're willing to bet really big when we have a strong hand. Our opponent mulls it over for quite some time, and then mentions that 8-5 makes a lot of sense. My heart immediately starts pounding. Usually when an opponent calls your hand, a calling chip is immediately followed, and he does end up throwing something in the middle, but it's his whole cards, not a calling chip. We show the bluff one time because it's good for the game as we scoop this $600 pot in the right direction. And at this point in the night, we went over and took a peek at the second table, which was playing way deeper than our table was at this point in the night. Everybody was just having a jolly old time, laughing up a storm that could be heard around the block. If you don't believe me, check this out.
And here we have an Eric in its natural habitat.
Anyhow, back to the main table. Our stacks weren't as deep as the feeder game, but they were still pretty chunky, and we have plenty of time to size these up. The $15 button straddle is on when I look down at 7-9 suited in the hijack. I decide to come along for the ride. My boy Shelby cannot let me see a flop for cheap. He makes $65 to go, and mama ain't raised no B, so obviously we're gonna put in the call. A bit of a wide defense here, but come on, it's Shelby. We gotta go. We just gotta go. 130 in the middle, and the board runs out 8 king 9 with 2 hearts. We verbally check this over to our boy, and he decided to continue here for $50. And now this is when we get malicious intentions. My favorite intentions. We put in the check raise to 125. Shelby thinks it over, but eventually puts in the call. 380 in the middle, and we're hoping to fade any hearts or Broadway cards that might bring in some straights. The 5 of spades is precisely what the doctor ordered. We put his second barrel in the chamber and decide to fire for $200 here. And at this point, Shelby's done with the hand. He returns his cards face down to the dealer, and we scoop another pot. This next hand is absolutely ridiculous. We look down at Jack 5 suited and have $20 in the middle. Why do we have $20 in the middle with this hand? Because we called in the dark before we actually looked at our hand, because it was a $20 button straddle and we were first to act under the gun. Here we go. $80 in the middle, and the board runs out 9-5-8. We have middle pair here with a marginal kicker. The action checks to me, and I have nothing to do here but to check back. And then we get a phenomenal turn card for free. It is a 5 of diamonds. To make things even better, the small blind decides to bet 25 bucks here. I think most of the time I'd like to put in a raise at this point since we do have trips here, but I've played against this particular villain a handful of times, and if I raise, he might slow down and check the river and just call a small bet. And if we just call here, I know he's 100% going to continue betting on the river. So with that in mind, we do just call the 25, hoping the button comes along, but unfortunately he gets out of the way. 130 in the middle, and then the Jack of Hearts peels off on the river, and the villain fires for an additional $45. This is what dreams are made of. We play a hand completely blind, flop a pair, turn trips, and river a full house? Well, who are we to not take advantage of this wonderful opportunity we've been presented? We put in a raise to 175, and the opponent literally tanked for so long that he got the clock called on him, but eventually he does end up putting in the call. We show him the bad news, and we got 480 smackaroonies coming our way. You may have noticed that between the last hand and this hand, our stack is significantly bigger. No, there wasn't a big hand that you missed. We just added on for 800 bucks. I just wanted to make sure that we have enough firing power to tangle with the best of them. So stack's bigger now, more chips, time to play some poker. We're getting a little silly here with king 6 suited in middle position, and I decide to open to $10. Definitely don't recommend raising this hand in early position or in later position for that matter. We're up on the night and trying to give some action with some marginal hands just for fun here. Anyways, $50 in the middle, 5 of us going to this flop. The board comes out 7 deuce 8 with 2 spades. We have a backdoor straight or a backdoor flush draw, but nothing else going on outside of that. Action checks through, and the 10 of diamonds comes on the turn, giving us a gut shot and the second nut flush draw. So when the action checks to me this time, we throw in a $25 bet, hoping to get called by a few people. We get 2 callers, and the rest of the players get out of the way. We go 3 ways to this river with 125 in the middle, and the Jack of diamonds peels off. We make our king high flush, but now what to do? Do we bet it or do we check it because we're out of position with 2 players left to act? If the front door spade draw got there, I think I would bet it here even out of position because it's likely just going to go check on the river. But since we have the backdoor flush draw, I decide to check instead and hope that one of our opponents takes a stab at this, and the button takes us up on our offer, bets $75 here, which I instantly pop back up to 200. He puts in the call. We show the second nut flush, and our opponent shows queen 9 for the straight. Not sure if checking the flush was the best idea there on the river, but it ended up working out this time, so I am not going to complain. For this next hand, we look down a king jack offsuit in the small blind. There's a $10 straddle under the gun, a raise to 25, a call. When the action gets back to me, I decide to call as well, but then the big blind decides to make it 100 to go, and then the hijack re-raises to 525. Yikes. Since it's our nemesis in the big blind, I was planning on giving him some action with a marginal hand with just king jack offsuit, but when the hijack goes 525 and then the cutoff goes all in for 605, there's no way in heck we're possibly going to call here, so I get out of the way. Obviously the hijack is not folding for 105 more, so he puts in the call, and I'll just go ahead and roll the clip from here.
Okay, I'm gonna do the main part.
All right, boys.
Okay, here's the main part.
Sweat. You're gonna be the main hand for this one. I love it. That's the winner right there.
You're just gonna talk trash about you on the vlog now.
Yeah.
That's good.
Look, this guy did this with 3 subs.
Ship it! Ship it! Ship it! wait.
Sidecar. Sidecar.
Pair of eights. Full house.
That's
Yeah,
good.
that's definitely good for the side.
Definitely good for the side.
So you don't want to fold that side pot.
I didn't know.
Congratulations, Mr. Reed, for taking down the main, and I hope you're all taking notes on Brian's masterclass on how to play 8-6 offsuit. The very next hand, we are on the button, and I straddle for $7. Brian decides to open to 20, and then the cutoff decides to re-raise to 125, and then absolute dream spot. We look down at pocket aces, seeing a big raise right behind us, and we are in position. This particular player has been pretty snug all night, so when he makes a raise this big, I expect him to just have a big pocket pair most of the time. Something like jacks, queens, or kings, more leaning towards queens or kings to be honest. I glance over at his stack and it looks like he put about a quarter of his money in already, so I'm gonna do a little bit more than a min raise here. I go 275, hoping that when the action gets back to him, he's just gonna put it all in. To my surprise, he just flat calls the 275 here, so we're off heads up to this flop, which comes 10-4 ace. Just casually flopping the nuts, no big deal. It wouldn't be an Outlaws vlog if we didn't get dealt pocket aces and then flop a set with it. I'm not sure if you guys have been here, if it's your first time tuning in, but for some reason, these last couple weeks, we've been getting aces multiple times a session and just flopping sets with them. And as if we weren't lucky enough, our opponent shoves into us when we have the nuts. We obviously put in the call, so there's $1,112 in the middle. The turn comes a 4 of clubs. River is a queen of hearts. We have a full house, and our opponent throws his hand into the muck. I probably should have let him show first so you guys could see it on the vlog, but I'm really not a fan of making our opponents show the losing hand. But he did mention that he had a big pair and was hoping that I did not have the ace. All right, time to get you up to speed, guys. Our boy Shelby put a $20 straddle out on the button. 3 players flat called the $20, and when the action got back to him, he raised to $120 here on the button. Then the small blind decided to re-raise to $350, and when the action gets back over to the other side of the table, the low jack then proceeded to go all in for over $1,500. Shelby only had about 600 behind, so he puts in the call. And then when the action gets back over to the small blind, Mr. Connor, he thinks it over for quite a bit of time, but it's not every day that you put in a nice chunky 4-bet and then get shoved into by 2 different players. If he had aces, he would have called. I think kings at this point probably would have just called instead of you got it, you got it. So I imagine he either has ace king and is planning to fold, or has pocket jacks or pocket queens. And to my surprise, Connor actually puts in the call here, so they're going 3 ways to this board. Shelby's in for the main, and then Connor and the other villain have a side pot brewing. Let's play a little game. Why don't you guys pause the video, go down into the comments below, and let me know what you think each player has. And if you don't feel like doing that, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel instead. I'm gonna go ahead and roll this clip out for you guys to enjoy.
That's all Aaron. That's all Aaron.
What do we got? Thank you. 5 ace high.
Oh.
Ace high. Queens. Aces.
Aces versus kings versus queens. What? Cooler.
Picture that.
Well, how are your guys' predictions? Are any of you going to give up your day jobs to become fortune tellers? I definitely am not. Nice hand to you, Mr. Connor.
And that was pretty much it as far as interesting hands for the night go. We played a few more hands, but they were small wins and small losses, so the stack didn't really change too much. Nothing really more to report into you guys, so we'll just go over the session stats real quick to close out the vlog. We bought in for a total of $2,000 tonight, and we cashed out $3,240, so a total profit of $1,240, which is a pretty solid night if I do say so myself. We were never really stuck or down in the session. I mean, I think at the beginning we may have lost 1 or 2 pots that put us into the red a tiny bit, but we quickly got it back and then just slowly built up our stack from there. The only reason we were in for 2,000 is because we kept adding on a couple $100 here and there, so our stack wouldn't be tiny compared to the rest of the table and we wouldn't get bullied. But I feel like tonight we played some solid poker overall. There weren't too too many massive pots, but just a lot of small consistent pots going in our favor. Definitely some room for analyzing and improvement though. All in all, it was another great session here at our favorite card room, Outlaws. If you guys are in the area and are ever free on a Thursday night, swing back at 5 p.m. to come play in our game. As you can see, it is an absolutely wonderful time. Thank you for stopping by, guys. I will catch you all next week. Good luck on the felt.